right, thank you all for being here today. The story, as we've heard it so far, right? Let's pick up just in Egypt, right? So we're in Egypt, we're slaves in Egypt, and we're set free. God like re-enters the scene with great power and shows his dominance over the other gods in the area, right? And then takes Israel through the desert and like uses this time in the desert to slowly like purify them, right? Like they get to the promised land, but they're not ready. So they have to spend all this time in the desert being made ready, learning to trust in the Lord, right? So they finally get into the promised land. And then we enter this period of judges, of times, so Israel doesn't have a king, and Israel is going through this process of like trusting the Lord, and everything's great, and the Lord's like letting them prosper and just like letting them just be like the dominant force in the area. But then they start getting comfortable and they start like worshiping other gods, and they start like just getting lax, and things go to crap. And then they cry out to the Lord, "Lord, help us, everything's terrible." And he comes in again because they've learned to trust him again. And there's just this cycle, right? So then, in this like major fit of not trusting the Lord, they say, "We need a king." And so God gives them Saul, who's not that great of a king. And then God gives them David, who's a pretty good king. And then we've got the Davidic line, so all the like family of David, like his sons, his children, his grandchildren, the Davidic line of kings, right? And we learned last time with Father Schnippel, like things do not really go well with this line. With the exception of a few kings who do a pretty good job, generally speaking, the Davidic line is just tanking it, right? Like you've got a lot of kings who are teaching Israel new ways to sin, right? Who are just doing a terrible job, turning to other gods, like breaking the commandments, just doing terrible. So that's where we pick up today. So God sends this prophet, a fellow you may have heard of, a fellow by the name of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, and he sends a couple other prophets too. There are a lot of prophets during this time, and they're all kind of saying the same thing. Jeremiah in particular is warning Israel, like, hey, you remember, like, we've learned this before. You need to trust the Lord and follow him. And if we turn to other gods and stop following the Lord, like it's always been disaster for us. It's always been a bad thing, right? So in his book here in chapter 7, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, reform your ways and your deeds so that I may dwell with you in this place. Do not put your trust in these deceptive words, the temple of the Lord." Like, because they were saying, like, "Oh, the temple's here, everything is great. Like, look, we got a nice temple. Oh, if only you thoroughly reform your ways and your deeds. If each of you deals justly with your neighbor. If you no longer oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow. If you no longer shed innocent blood in this place, or follow after other gods to your own harm. Only then will I let you continue to dwell in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors long ago and forever. But look at you! You put your trust in deceptive words to your own loss. Do you think that you can steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, sacrifice to Baal, who's one of the other gods, follow other gods that you do not know, and then come and stand in my presence in this house, which bears my name, and say, we are safe, we can commit all these abominations again? I love that line. It sounds like something a father would say. Not in this house, right? So like, Israel is actually, they're going into this custom, which is popular in the Middle East of the days, of sacrificing children for the sake of, they perceive the favor of the gods, right? And God is saying you cannot be my people and do this. You cannot be my children and kill your own children, right? You cannot do all these things and still pretend like you follow me, like we're in a good relationship, right? Which is like, man, the whole point of Exodus is like, I give you the law. Look, you know my name now. You are in my house, right? Like it's this closer relationship that we're just blowing away right now, right? So we take this warning, and of course we turn to the Lord and quit what we're doing, right? No! In Jeremiah 25, this word the prophet Jeremiah spoke to all the people of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Since the 13th year of Judah, that is 23 years, the word of the Lord has come to me, and I spoke to you untiringly, but you would not listen. The Lord kept sending you all his servants, the prophets, But you refuse to listen or pay attention to this message. Turn back, each of you, from your evil way, and learn from your evil deeds. Then you shall remain in the land which the Lord gave you and your ancestors from of old and forever. Do not follow other gods to serve and bow down to them. Do not provoke me with the words of your hands, or I will bring evil upon you. But you would not listen to me, oracle of the Lord. And so you provoked me with the works of your hands to your own harm. So he's saying, for all these years, for 23 years, the Lord has been saying, look, you really got to straighten out here. Look, you really got to get back on the right track. Look, I need you. I want you to be happy here. But you haven't. Hence, thus says the Lord God of hosts, since you would not listen to my words, I am about to send for and to fetch all the tribes of the north, oracle of the Lord, and I will send for Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, which has got to hurt, right? Like this foreign king, my servant, not you, right? I will bring them against this land, its inhabitants, and all these neighboring nations. I will doom them, making them an object of horror, of hissing, of everlasting reproach. Among them I will put an end to the song of joy, the song of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstone and the light of the lamp. This whole land shall be a ruin and a waste. 70 years these nations shall serve the king of Babylon. So what the Lord is saying is like, you done messed up, right? Like, and just the same way that I purified you in the desert, that I made you get back, that I taught you to trust me, we're going to have to do this again. Now, this, like, keep in mind, the original story from the beginning is we were in the garden with God, happy in paradise, and we blew it, and we were cursed. And the promise that we got in the very beginning in Genesis 3, super early, is, but there will be a way that we will lift this curse. God is always working for the salvation of Israel, right? He's always trying to pure them, always trying to bring them back to him. This time period is a pretty rough time period where we are just dragging our feet every step of the way, right? And this is kind of one of those drastic moments where it's like, look, like we need to get good, right? So this seems like a pretty bad thing. I'm going to let this foreign nation come in and destroy you. There will be no more the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstone, the light. There will be nothing going on here. The land will be a ruin and a waste. So it seems basically like, is this the end of the story? Like the promise of lifting the curse? Like, are we just done? At this point, 10 out of the 12 tribes of Israel are just gone to the wind. Like they're lost. All that's left is Benjamin and Judah, these two tribes, right? All that's left is like this supposed faithful line of David. We're really not doing well, right? But in Jeremiah 31, he says, see, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors the day I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. They broke my covenant, though I was their master. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days. I will place my law within them, and I write it upon their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So even just like in Genesis 3, where it's like we fall, we mess up, we're cursed. But there's this promise. Even in this, there's this promise of, but this is not the end. There will come this new covenant, which is different than any covenant we've seen so far. And as we saw in the last prophecy, this exile, this time where Babylon's in charge, will last 70 years. So even like walking into this exile, they've got this idea of, but God will rescue us. This is not the end. This is just a period of 70 years, right? So Babylon rolls on in and they destroy the city and they take a bunch of like the royalty, like the princes, the people of the line of David, and a bunch of their best artisans, their best like townspeople, you know, all the people that are really swell. They're like, you're coming back with us to Babylon to work with us now, right? So they go. And that's where the book of Daniel starts. Daniel's a sick book that's full of really cool stories. It's only like 13, 12 chapters long. It's not terribly long. And there are a lot of chapters that just got a lot of really cool stories in them. You probably already know some of them, right? In particular, there are these 4 guys who become kind of the heroes of the book of Daniel, right? And they are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and proficiency in all literature and wisdom, and to Daniel the understanding of all dreams and visions. At the end of the time, so the way that this goes is they show up and they're like entrusted to this guy, this chamberlain. And the chamberlain says like, I have to feed you all these foods from the king's table because you work for us now, right? And we have to make sure that you're healthy because you work for us now. And they say, we can't eat this food because it's against our laws, right? So imagine it's like pork, bacon, ham, other pig things, right? Things that they're not allowed to eat. And the chamberlain's like, well, you have to eat this food because... Did I hit the button? I did hit the button. You have to eat this food because if you're sick, like if you look weak, if you're not eating the good ham, then like I'm going to get my head cut off because I'm supposed to be giving you this ham, right? So they make this deal that they are going to like, we'll just eat the food that we're allowed to eat, and if we look unhealthy at the end of some period of days, then we'll eat your food, right? So the chamberlain comes back and they look like they're looking better than all the other people are, right? And the reason for this is like they're being faithful to the commands of the Lord. So in the midst of all this infidelity, you've got these 4 guys who are saying like, we will follow the commands of the Lord. Like, and imagine how difficult that would be because you just got brought out of your country. Like you just saw your own country destroyed. And here you are surrounded by other people. Like it'd be tempting to be like, well, guess we're Babylonian now. But they're still holding faithful to this promise, right? So at the end of the time, the king had specified for their preparation, the chief chamberlain brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king had spoken to all of them, but none of them was found equal to these 4 guys, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel. And so they entered the king's service. In any question of wisdom or understanding which the king put to them, he found them 10 times better than any of the magicians and enchanters in their kingdom. So because they're faithful, God blesses them with this wisdom, with this understanding, right? So one day, the king has this vision. He has a dream. And he wakes up and he's freaked out by this dream, right? And he says, bring in all the enchanters and all the magicians and tell me what this dream was and what it means, right? So they can't just make up something. They have to know what his dream was, right? So all these guys come in and like, you dreamed of this and that and that. And he's like, no, that's not what I dreamt. And at the end of all of this, everybody has been presented to him. Everybody has guessed and nobody's been right. And so what the king says is, okay, kill everybody who just guessed, right? He gives this command that they're all going to die. And Daniel hears about this, right? And Daniel says to like some guy, I don't remember who it is, it doesn't say his name here. He says like, hey, is it true that the king's going to kill all you guys? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, why don't you let me take a stab at it? And so he goes and meets the king and says, hey, if I get it right, don't kill all your dudes, right? And the king's like, shoot, right? So this is what Daniel says. He says, in your vision, O king, you saw a statue, very large and exceedingly bright, terrifying in appearance as it stood before you. Its head was pure gold, its chest and arms were silver, its belly and thighs bronze, its legs iron, its feet partly iron and partly clay. While you watched, a stone was hewn from a mountain without a hand being put to it, and it struck its iron and clay feet, breaking them to pieces. The iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold all crumbled at once, fine as the chaff on the threshing floor in summer, and the wind blew them away without a trace. But the stone that struck the rock became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is such an exciting prophecy, right? So what this is, he basically says like, king, this is the dream you had. What it means is that these are the kingdoms that will come after you, right? So the gold, the Babylon, the head, the head is meant to be the kingdom of Babylon, his kingdom, right? He says its chest and arms were partly silver. The chest and arms are meant to represent the Median/Persian Empire, right? So the Medes are like a bunch of dudes, some kingdom, some armies, you know, and they get conquered by the Persians, and so they're kind of like one big happy empire, right? Then the bronze are the Greeks. The iron is the Romans, and the Romans and the mixed with the different, like the fact that the Romans kind of conquered people and took them to themselves, but they weren't really, you know, necessarily a super unified group. So this prophecy is basically, it's anticipating the future of the entire region, which is cool because, like, this is exactly, of course, the way that it plays out. Like, these nations all come. And, like, what was I going to say? Oh, you've got this giant friggin' rock, which a stone comes from the mountain and just wipes these things away. So the prophecy is like these are the kingdoms in a certain sense that are going to be like ruling this area and ruling Israel. But at some point there will be something that's not part of this statue, something not made by human hands that will come and just wipe away this series of empires. That will be in theory like a kingdom like unlike any kingdom before it, right? So we've got this prophecy in Jeremiah, not only of the return, but of like this new covenant that's coming. And now we've got another prophecy of this kingdom that's going to be like unlike and more powerful than any of the kingdoms that are coming down the line. Does that make sense? Cool. So, bam. This is kind of fun. This is a super awesome thing because there are a lot of other things that there are a lot of other really awesome stories from Daniel, right? Nebuchadnezzar has another dream that Daniel interprets. There's a Babylonian god who like they're all worshiping, and they prove as one of the reasons that he's a real god is like, look, every day he eats all the food that we put out for him. We close the doors at night, and when we come in the morning, all the food's gone. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, all right, everybody's worshiping this god. And Daniel's like, I'm not worshiping this god. Let me prove to you he's false, right? And Nebuchadnezzar's like, he's eating all this food, man. He's got to be a god. Who else is eating all this food? So he sprinkles ashes in their little temple when they close the doors at night, and they seal the door. And when they go in the next morning, the food's all gone. And the king's like, look, see, he ate all the food. And Daniel says, there are footprints in the ashes. Because I keep hitting this button. Oh no! Because the like priests and their family were coming in and eating all this food in the middle of the night, and that's where it was going, right? So then Nebuchadnezzar kills all the priests. He kills a dragon. There's a bit where he kills a dragon. There's of course the story of the lion's den, right? Which is another like you have to bow down and worship this god, or else I'm going to throw you in this lion's den. There is of course the story of the three other guys, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, getting thrown in the big furnace, like which is heated so hot that even the people who throw them into the furnace are consumed by the flame. But after King Nebuchadnezzar dies, Daniel's still chilling out, and Nebuchadnezzar's son is a fellow by the name of Belshazzar. And Belshazzar decides he's going to have himself a big party. And so he gave a great banquet for thousands of his nobles, with whom he drank. Under the influence of the wine, he ordered the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem to be brought in so that the king, his nobles, his consorts, and his concubines might drink from them. When the gold vessels taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, had been brought in, and while the king, his nobles, consorts, and concubines were drinking wine from them, they praised their gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. So when they conquered Jerusalem, they took all the fancy vessels from the temple. And now they're like, let's have a party and drink out of all these vessels. So that's exactly what they do. But suddenly, opposite the lampstand, the fingers of a human hand appeared, writing on the plaster of the wall in the king's palace. When the king saw the hand that wrote, his face became pale, his thoughts terrified him, his hip joints shook, and his knees knocked. So like as soon as he does this hand starts writing letters on the wall, which would be alarming, especially if you were desecrating the vessels of a temple that you had just that you had conquered. So he calls, in a common theme, he calls all the magicians and enchanters and nobody can explain it. Then he calls David and Daniel. And Daniel said, this is the writing that was inscribed, Mene, Tekel, and Perez. Which is interesting because these are words that are like, these are Aramaic words, which is what they spoke in Babylon. So the problem, like they could see the words and read it, they just had no idea what it meant, right? So he says, these words mean Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Which, that's the next step of the big statue, right? That's the prophecy of what the next kingdom's going to be. Then by order of Belshazzar, they clothed Daniel in purple with a chain of gold around his neck and proclaimed him third in governing the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain, right? So they're like, oh, great, good for you. You told us what it means. And then he gets killed, right? So there are two fascinating things about this story. Number one, Persian accounts of this war, like historical accounts of people who are not Jewish, not Christian, not nothing. Well, they're something. They're, I don't know what they are. Zoroastrian?
Yeah,
Probably. The like accounts of the day which still survive talk about the fall of Babylon. And what they say is, when they rolled into the city, they were having a big party. And everyone was so drunk that we just walked into the city, right? And then they found the king and killed him. So like actual historical evidence suggests exactly that this, like that night, they were having some big friggin' party and like we just like, oh, there he is, and we killed him. And suddenly Babylon, one of the most powerful armies in the world, is just ours, right? Yeah. They just walked right in. So Xenophon is the writer that account comes from. The other thing, which I think is even cooler than this, is what the Jewish Midrash says about this, right? So the Jewish Midrash is like Jewish commentary on the Old Testament. Super fascinating. This is what they say. Belshazzar's feast, in the course of which the sacred vessels of the Temple of Jerusalem were put to sacrilegious use, is traced by the rabbis to a miscalculation in chronology. He well knew that the period of Jewish exile, according to Jeremiah's prophecy, was not to exceed 70 years. So he knew the prophecy of Jeremiah, saying that the exile was going to be 70 years. Belshazzar sat there and counted. And he said, well, my father reigned for 45 years. This other guy, it was during an interval, reigned for 23 years. And then I've reigned for 2 years now. And that makes 70. So the prophecy isn't going to happen. Like it's not true. God isn't going to deliver these people. God must not exist. Hey, let's drink out of his vessels, right? Let's throw us a party with all these things of this God who doesn't exist, right? Emboldened by this erroneous calculation, he made impious use of the sacred vessels at the royal feast. So basically, they say, and they go on with a bunch of more math, but basically but the fall of the temple was not at the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. It was like 7 years into it. So you're actually off by like 7 years. So like part of the reason why he did this whole feast was basically to say like this prophecy isn't happening and the God of Israel is not real or not more powerful than our gods, right? So it's that kind of like arrogance that God immediately responds to and says like, nope, not only am I real, but like, you're gone, and like, we're going to do this prophecy. Wait. So Belshazzar, our friend Belshazzar dies, and it's the first, and then this guy Darius the Mede takes over, right? So So Daniel then, shortly after, says, in the first year of Darius, the son of that guy, of the race of the Medes, reigned over the kingdom of the Chaldeans in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years the Lord had decreed to the prophet Jeremiah. Jerusalem was to lie in ruin for 70 years, right? He's reminiscing of this prophecy. And he turns to the Lord, God, to seek help in prayer and petition with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes, which is to say, he's basically like, we're coming up on the end of 70 years. Right? So it's like 6 years after the span is very quick, where it's like, it doesn't seem like we're heading back and rebuilding Jerusalem yet, right? So he prays in fasting and mourning and sackcloth and ashes, basically say like, Lord, we know we messed up. Like, I am offering you this prayer of contrition, like, please restore us, like, honor this promise that you've made, right? So he does this for a little while. It's actually a really cool, beautiful prayer. It takes up most of the chapter. I was still praying to the Lord my God, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, presenting my petition concerning the holy mountain of my God. I was still praying when the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision before, came in flight at the time of the evening offering. So Gabriel is the angel, the archangel Gabriel. And I like how he just like drops his name, like, yeah, Gabriel, I've seen him before, you know. He instructed me with these words, Daniel, I have now come to give you understanding. When you began your petition, an answer was given which I have come to announce, because you are beloved. Therefore, mark the answer and understand the vision. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your holy city. Then transgression will stop and sin will end. Guilt will be expiated. Everlasting justice will be introduced, vision and prophecy ratified, and a holy of holies will be anointed, which is to mean the return of God's presence among his people, which got wiped out when they destroyed the temple, right? So the prophecy is 70 weeks, and then everything will be good, right? Which is what, like a year and change. But here's the problem. 70 weeks is actually 70 weeks of years. So it's 70 times 7 for the week, years, which is 490 years, right? That's a long time. The prophecy has been, in a certain sense, changed to say now it's going to be 490 years before all this is over. Like, you're still not where you need to be. Yeah. Now, right. Now that sucks. But the original prophecy is in fact still honored. So what happens, and well, I don't know how much I should say or how much Nick wants to say. Let's leave it right there. We're like an intense place to leave this. The original prophecy is still honored. There will be a way that the temple is going to be restored in the original 70 years. But there's a longer period of waiting now. A longer period of 490 years before something big is going to happen. Now again, keep in mind the prophecies that we've heard so far. A new covenant is coming. You will return from exile. There will be this giant freaking rock which completely blows away all the kingdoms that we know. And now you will have to wait a little while in this period of purification, but something big is coming where the Holy of Holies will be anointed. God's presence will return to his people. That's pretty exciting. That's pretty epic, right? So that's the spirit of longing, of anticipation that the people are in right now. Of we're not out of the woods yet with this exile thing, but something big is on the horizon.